Yeah, this is
There
going
you
to be
go.
on your computer. Yep.
Okay.
We're fine. We can go now.
Can I go, Alice? Would you like to? Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Agnes Bodis. I work in the Department of Linguistics at Macquarie University in the Applied Linguistics program. I convene the Graduate Certificate of TESOL program. So you will see that teaching English as for speakers of other languages. So my students are prospective ESL, English as a second language teachers. But they are language teachers nevertheless. I've been an ESL teacher myself for long years now, and I've taught many different contexts, countries, different age groups, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'll just share my slides. I start. Oh, no. How do I start? Oh, this is the classic thing, sharing. I'm going to share. Let's see if I can. I'll share something that I'll show you later. Can you see my slides? Yes?
Yes,
No?
yes.
Yes, thank you. Because I can't see you now. So this is going to be, can you see the full slides? Sorry, before I ask, before I start.
Yes.
Right? So it's not the presenter view. So this session is going to be at learning-oriented assessment. Now it's a bit misleading because basically the main element of this whole concept is learning and task design. So not so much on the assessment side, but I'll talk about that later. So this is going to be a practical session with a focus on task design, ESL, and I'm going to show you some examples through ESL teaching background from that field, but it's all going to be transferable to other languages, of course. So I've got the classic housekeeping slides here. So if you have taken part in the previous sessions, you will see that it's easier to take part through a computer laptop. Okay, I think this was someone's microphone. So we're going to be using video, audio, chat, and breakout rooms. There's going to be 2 breakout rooms, 2 sessions with tasks here. What else? We will use Padlet in the breakout rooms. And please note that this session is video recorded and audio recorded. The chat will not be, and the breakout rooms can't be either. Now, in the breakout rooms, during the session, you'll be automatically allocated into a room with a small group of participants. And you're going to, before you go there, you will have access to a Padlet link where you can see the task, but I'm also going to talk a lot about the task and show you some examples as well. When you're in the breakout room, please unmute yourself and switch on the videos if you speak so that you can meet others and you can talk. And you're encouraged to share your group's response in the Padlet, but also feel free to share your own individual response. I've been taking part in the previous sessions and I've seen that a lot of people have been posting, so it was great. So let's start with a quick question that I would like you to address in the chat. So how do you assess your students? Share a typical assessment that you use in the chat. How do you make sure, how do you check that they've learned what you've taught them? Let me see if I can open the chat somewhere. Exams, there you go. Dictation, role play. Yeah. Discussion. Project assessment, grammar assessment. Okay. Questions. Oh, you're checking with questions as well. That's awesome. Oh my God, it's so quick. I can't even read it. grammar. Q&A quizzes like Kahoot, great. Spelling test, yeah. I wonder if I can make this. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Kahoot. That's a very popular one. And role plays. Okay, so we're going to come back to your answers. But let me see. Let me just tell you briefly what exactly is going to happen in this session here. So learning-oriented assessment is the focus, and it's a tool to engage students with their learning. And as I said, it's not just assessment in itself. It provides a systematic approach to language teaching through really systematically integrated tasks. So it's more about task design, to be honest. So this workshop will have two areas of focus. I'll talk to you about a framework and practical applications of LOA, so learning-oriented assessment task design that we did. And we're going to have a closer focus on the principle of scaffolding as part of the task design that goes into the learning-oriented assessment framework. So we're going to look at 3 dimensions of scaffolding: concepts, procedures, and language. This follows a CLIL approach. Now, I didn't write it down there what CLIL stands for. CLIL stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. Some of you might be doing that, or some of you are not. It really depends in the primary sector. For example, ESL is quite often, or ELD is quite often CLIL, basically, when you also need to teach other content, not just language. But as I said, I'm teaching language teachers myself, and I found that even those students or those teachers who do not focus on teaching content or just need to teach language, they find it really useful as well, because there are 3 dimensions to which they can play around with how to help students achieve the goal of the task. We're going to do some practice. So we're going to do a task design practice and a scaffolding practice. So you will see that, excuse me, what we covered today links very nicely with what you've seen in the other sessions as well. So learning autonomy, engagement, if you went to the first session by Phil Benson. And what Phil mentioned in the first session about the 10 strategies, some of these are very relevant here. So this is going to be a more practical application of those. So for example, really important to draw on students out of class experiences involving peer and self-assessment in the process of learning. That ensures a deeper level of learning, reflection, as I said. So this will be part of the session today. So, which one would some of your examples would fall into? What do we know about these assessment tasks? Now, this is when I will probably have the chat out, but maybe it's quicker if we just have a look. So there's lots of different terminologies here. So formative assessment, summative assessment, and you have mentioned this before as well in your chat. Assessment for learning, assessment of learning, assessment as learning. Let me just open this so that I can see. Yeah, and I put the last one there, learning-oriented assessment. So, for example, your examples. If you do a Kahoot quiz, for example, at the end of what you've just covered, which one would that be? Do you know? Yeah, someone actually mentioned. Well, no, it's not an answer to my question, but someone mentioned that. Yeah, summative assessment, right? So a key element between the differentiation of all these assessment types is their focus. Where are they focusing? Are they focusing on what has been done? So on the past actions, the judging how much the students have learned, because in that case it would be summative assessment or assessment of learning, right? Whereas if you look at some kind of assessment that helps students see what they and the teachers help students and the teachers to gauge what else needs to be done, or where the learning, in which direction should be going. That's formative assessment or assessment for learning. Assessment as learning is a process of developing metacognition for students, so that students can make connections between their learning, the assessment and learning, so students become self-directed learners. Now, assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning, it's all learning-oriented, of course, but they serve different purposes. And the learning-oriented assessment is basically something that combines all these together. Okay. So I think I've already covered what I've just, I'm showing you now. So all these are learning-oriented, but there is this kind of dichotomy of forward-looking or backward-looking, whereas LOA is a powerful and empowering way and integrates all these together. All right, so I'm going to give you an example and keep the chat open for this. We're going to look at some examples through a very popular Australian cartoon, Bluey. Now, my examples use English language teaching as a medium, as I said, but you can substitute these for other languages. So if you think, or if you think about translanguaging, you can sometimes, you would provide input texts in English if that helps the students take out that cognitive load of understanding something and producing. And you will have heard about this before, right? So Bluey is great for various age groups. In fact, adults like it too. And I have a task description here, and my question is what kind of assessment this is. So A, students collect descriptive words of characters in Bluey, of personality. They watch an episode and discuss in groups which descriptive words were presented in the episode. The teacher gives feedback. So what kind of assessment do you think this is? Do you think you can put that in the chat? Is that for learning, formative, I can see, for learning? All right, let's see if I show you B. Students watch an episode of Bluey and practice recounting the events. In the next lesson, the students watch a different episode and their task is to write a recount of it. The teacher marks the writing and records the results. So what is B? You can see the difference here, right? Summative. So the A was formative and B is summative. So what would LOA look like? Learning-oriented assessment. How can you combine these? We're going to come back to this example of Bluey later on, so I'm going to keep this example here. But I'll explain what LOA looks like. Okay, good job in the chat. All right. So what is it? Learning-oriented assessment is a combination of learning, teaching, and assessment, as I said earlier. But in LOA, learning comes first, as I mentioned. This means that this element is emphasized more than the measurement in the process of assessment. So Carlos defines 3 key principles here. So assessment tasks should be designed to stimulate sound learning practices among students. So assessment tasks as learning tasks. Assessment should involve students actively engaging with the criteria, quality of their own and or peers' performance. So they assess each other and they assess themselves as well. And feedback should be timely and looking so as to support current and future student learning. So the aim here is to make students act on the feedback they have received. And that's why it needs to be timely. So meeting these principles will lead to the desired learning outcomes. So tasks are used to provide evidence for learning. I would also like to mention, you can see the last point there, the role of technology in this. So especially in the current times when the pandemic has put digital literacy in the focus for all of us. So this learning-oriented assessment task design is something that can benefit from an integrated use of technology, while also teaching, and students need to learn, and teachers of course need to improve their digital literacy skills as well. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to focus on these three aspects here. So the model of LOA identifies the main components of it in terms of tasks, learner involvement, and feedback. So let's look at each of these one by one. The learning tasks, they need to be aligned with the curriculum objectives for all of us, as we know. It's also called constructive alignment, or as Carlos puts it, fit for purpose. Tasks need to be fit for purpose. They need to be authentic. What does this mean? So they need to be something that's directly relevant for the learners, the students' needs, and the language use they're aiming towards. So for example, online communication with their peers would mean that your tasks will kind of mirror this kind of task. And also, if you give your students some degree of choice, it will motivate them more. So for example, they can choose a family photo to describe. So that gives them some kind of autonomy there. Let's move on to learner involvement. Students should be involved actively to promote a disposition to lifelong learning, involvement with their own and their peers' performance. And they need to evaluate each other as well. And that's a deeper engagement with the criteria as well, the success criteria of the task. And feedback, it needs to be timely, so forward-looking, and so phrased in a way that provides the students guidance, with guidance. And also it's something that the students can act upon. So it's not enough to say, well done, you did a good job. You actually have to say how it could be, or what direction can make this good performance even better. So rather than just justifying the mark or the assessment level, which would be a judgment, the feedback needs to be feed forward. Now, I also inserted technology right in the middle of this, this model. So this is something I have added to this diagram because technology can actually aid all three aspects of this model. Firstly, it can help through the tasks. So the task can be delivered online, as we all know now. The learner involvement, learners can reflect on this task online or in a video or in a little comment somewhere. Feedback can be provided online as well, which would make it timely, actually, because they don't need to wait for, a paper to be handed out. So I'll just give you a quick example conducted that we did at Macquarie University. So you will see that the framework was really adaptable to any kind of teaching context. I'm going to talk about adult education, but it could be used in any age group and not just teaching language for that matter. So as part of our Graduate Certificate of TESOL program and Master in TESOL program, our students learn about various aspects of teaching methodology. And one aspect of it is called micro-teaching, is when they need to practice little bits and pieces of teaching with their peers, and they get valuable feedback from each other. Now, we used to do that in class, but of course, in March this year, we had to move all students online for a while until session 2, actually. So the challenges that we found, that we had all these students in class practicing their teaching, but now we had to somehow still teach them to teach online. Now, if you remember, we had all different issues with homeschooling, and some people were still working. And so we decided that we're going to do this asynchronously, which means students had their own time to complete the tasks. So you can see Kirby and Hulen that I'm referring to there. They found that Voicethread helps build a community. And this is something we prioritize because of COVID as well. And so we chose this platform to work on. So Voicethread is a media player, and you will have access to the slides and you can click on it and have a look. But I can show you something here that you will have seen right at the beginning. It's a great interface for collaboration. Now, if I can just show you really quickly how it works. You can see my Voicethread now? Yeah, I guess. This is something I actually do at the beginning of each session. I use Voicethread with my students. It's a very easy platform to use. You have a choice of uploading video. This, in this case, is a PowerPoint slide, just one single slide where I put a lot of pictures, and I recorded myself. I'm not going to play it, but because it takes a while, I think it's about a minute. I just talk about these pictures that are related to my life here. And the good thing about this is that students can comment on it, and all these students have left their wonderful comments to me. What I did is I actually gave them a little task here. Where is it? I gave them two truths and one lie. They had to find out which one is the lie there. And for that, they have to listen to what I'm saying. So I made everyone actually listen. But the good thing about this, if I click here, you can leave a comment. So once you uploaded your slide or whatever you upload, you can upload a picture or a PDF. You can leave an audio comment on it. You can actually draw on it while you're talking. I can't remember what the phone stands for, but you can record yourself talking as well in a video, and you can upload things as well. So just going back to my slides. So that's the good thing about Voicethread. We actually use it for teaching. You can use it for assessment too. Now I have to go through, sorry, come back to the beginning. Where was I? Here. Okay. So I'll give you a quick run through of how we used Voicethread. So we gave the students 3 tasks to practice their teaching, marked as Voicethread 1, 2, 3. So in the first one, in the blue one, they had to do a very simple video of themselves, just giving instructions, short and easy task. After this, they had some tasks to teach them how to give constructive feedback. So that's the purple bit. It's not related to Voicethread at all. It's just some tasks to learn how to provide feedback. What is good feedback? What is the good language of feedback? How do we provide feedback in a nice and polite way? And the elements of feedback. Now, then they had to do another recording of themselves. This is all spread out during the semester, of course. Just a 3-minute recording, in the blue or green circle there. So that's a different aspect of teaching. They were focusing on teaching pronunciation, I think. But they also had to give each other feedback using those principles of feedback that they've learned. After that, they had another input task, the orange one. And here they learned about reflection on action and reflection for action, which means reflection on action means that reflect on what has happened, what was good and bad about my performance, and for action means what you're planning to do to address those issues. So they had to reflect on their previous recordings. And finally, in the third Voicethread, they had to demonstrate that can put the feedback and reflection into practice. So all these are formative assessment or assessment for learning tasks, but at the end of the session or the semester, we actually assess their teaching in a video, so a similar way. And this, we found that students who actually went through all these series of tasks, they fared very well in the last assessment task, in their assignments. We also found that students were more confident in giving feedback to each other, and that's an important skill for teachers as well. And overall, they engaged with the course materials on a much deeper level. And because they had access to other people's videos, they didn't just see themselves, they saw a lot of other people and the feedback they got. So going back to LOA, Learning-Oriented Assessment, the tasks were aligned with the curriculum objectives, so that students basically practiced their teaching, they were authentic. There was a lot of learner involvement there because of the feedback and marking criteria, and technology was all online. Yes. So what platforms can be used if you don't want to use Voicethread? You might know some of these already. Flipgrid is a very common platform. This is a video discussion site. As a teacher, you can create a class and you can set up a task and students post their videos. It also works as a mobile app, and it looks fun and it's colorful. Students really like it. TESOL is something that's very popular in the primary school sector, and it combines video, text, and picture, and you can lots of different functionalities there. It's great to keep the parents aware of what's going on in the lessons. Teachers post messages to parents too. You can interact. So it's a great platform there. Padlet, you will know this from our sessions as well, or otherwise as well. You will have used this before. So it's mainly text posts, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think you can, I haven't used this for a while, but I think you can link videos in there, but I have a feeling that it's easier to link YouTube videos first. So that might be a complication there. Now WebChat, I haven't used it before, but it looks very promising. It appears to be a great platform where you can share text, pictures, and videos. So these are mostly free, up to a certain functionality or a certain number of students that you share it with. But of course, there's a subscription option for them. So this is something that I suggest trying out as well. Now let's have a look at a task that I've got here. And I'm going to show you, don't worry, I'm going to show you an example for this. I'm going to come back to Bluey. So this is a task. I have simplified the diagram that I've just showed you. We had for our Voicethread task, just to make it a bit simpler. So the task is to come up with a series of tasks for your students to practice language. And it has to be within the topic of travel. So if you follow the diagram, you will see that 1, 2, and 3 will need to be some kind of task, productive skill tasks. So either drawing or explaining, acting out, or narrating. It's a speaking task, or maybe it's a writing task that students can share. So maybe they write a story or narrate something, describe something. Whereas A and B, what we call the enabling tasks, need to be something that that help the students engage with the learning more. So maybe it's something to do with the marking criteria, then have a little checklist and see how to use it, how to give feedback to each other, how to evaluate themselves, etc. So I'll give you an example. It's time to have a break, I can see my voice here. So I've got this, I just tried to align it with the stage, and I aligned it, this is an example through Bluey, to stage 2 students with prior learning experiences, language learning, I mean. So I've got these kind of outcomes here. Composes text in language using modeled language, demonstrates understanding of elements of grammar and familiar language patterns, recognizes pronunciation and intonation patterns. So all these could be combined into this series of tasks. So number 1 would be this part here. After watching an episode of Bluey, The Beach, I'm not sure if you know that, students draw or color the main events and narrate them using past tenses, and then share the video with each other. Then one enabling task comes, maybe in another week. students evaluate a sample and then practice evaluating each other's videos using a checklist. You know, have you used the right past tenses, the right, what is that, sequencing pronouns, etc. Then number 2 is something similar, but gives the students a bit more freedom. Students present a family photo of an excursion and narrate, or a trip, and narrate that using past tenses. Again, they share the video and students evaluate each other's videos. Then in another week comes some enabling tasks. Students learn to evaluate themselves and identify what aspects of the language they need to work on in number 3. So they make a plan how to do that in number 3. So students are given characters and they create a 2-minute story with storyboard and narrate it and share it in a video. So you can see how 1, 2, and 3 are actually building on each other and giving more and more freedom to the students. So if we can, if you could do something like this within the theme of travel in your groups, that would be great. So how do we do this?
Oh,
to the breakout rooms.
And all the breakout rooms now.
Okay, so you've had some great responses there. As some feedback, what I would consider, and that's probably the next level of planning these tasks, is when you look at these 1, 2, and 3, they need to be similar in some way. So they need to build on each other. So for number 1, for example, in my example, the students need to use past tenses to narrate something that they've just seen. In number 2, they need to use past tenses again to narrate something that they've experienced. Again, that's something that they're familiar with, but it's something that's different for each student, right? Whereas number 1 would be the same for each student. And number 3 is, again, using past tenses to come up with something completely new. But again, the underlying languages, the grammar should be the same. Maybe even the vocabulary, because it's all about travel and beach. So possibly they can use whatever they practiced before. So next, we're not going to have another breakout room after this, but consider your tasks in a way that you could use the same kind of language in 1, 2, and 3. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the concept of scaffolding. And we're looking at how you can set up tasks that will maximize your students' chances of learning. So the concept of scaffolding comes from Brunner, and it means that the help that the teacher gives to the students to facilitate their learning. So the word scaffolding is also used in construction, as you can see from my picture here. It's the structure that helps the workers carry out the work. But in this picture, you can see that the scaffolding is very special, or at least to those of us who are used to metal beams. So this scaffolding is made of bamboo, and you might have seen it around the world. This makes the scaffolding sturdy, but also very flexible. And this flexibility is that I'm going to focus on when it comes to designing tasks. And that's why we're going to look at 3 different aspects of scaffolding tasks through the design of CLIL. Now, CLIL, as I said, stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. It is used in context when both the subject knowledge and the language needs to be taught at the same time. So some of your learners might do that. So to quote Phil Ball, learners must be taught in a way that helps them use language in order to learn the subject knowledge. So the students need to learn, for example, geography through a foreign language or a second language. Then that's content and language learning as well. Now, how is this relevant to language teaching and scaffolding tasks? What are we talking about? As I've mentioned before, I found that teachers find this, in our teacher training program, find this concept really useful when it comes to language teaching, and the way they design their tasks, because they have some elements of content. So everything that you teach has some kind of topic, right? And some topics are more accessible than others. For example, environmental change can be much more abstract than, for example, going to the beach, right? So something that are much more directly relevant to learners, they will find it much more accessible as a concept as well. So let's look at the 3 dimensions of CLIL according to Phil Ball and his colleagues. You can find the book reference at the end of the reference list. It's really useful. They use the analogy of the mixing desk. So it's used for creating various effects in music, as you can see the little switches there, and they're not switches, they're clients. So you can turn one instrument down or the volume of something else up. You can tell I'm not really a musician, but I know this is what you do. So to have this kind of combined effect, and this is what we're going to look at, how the tasks can be adjusted along 3 different dimensions to have the right difficulty and to address the needs of the students. So the 3 dimensions we're talking about are concepts, procedures, and language. So the concepts are understood, as you can see in the quote as well. The concepts are understood by doing something using a certain discourse. This last part is language, using a certain discourse. So we have each task have a concept, a topic, the procedures, what is it that they need to do, and language. And the procedures, for example, in this first one, you can see that when the concept is challenging, so the topic is very challenging for the students, it's harder to understand what it is about and all the things that are related to the topic. The procedures can be lowered and the language required to perform the task could be lowered. I'm going to show you some examples for this, but first I'll talk about these 3 elements. So what do we mean by concept? So for our purposes, of course, I'm not talking about CLIL, but for language teaching, it is the topic of the task that the task covers. And the difficulty of the concept depends on the complexity and the familiarity the students have with it. So as an example, I've already mentioned environmental change, for example, or maybe, you know, the effects of tourism on the developing countries, for example, which is not really a fitting example at the moment, I know. But things like law, these are much more conceptually complex than going to the beach or buying your groceries, for example. Procedures. So the procedures are the actions that students need to do to carry out a task. So this is what we call lower order thinking or lots or higher order thinking. So for example, naming the ingredients in a recipe would be easier than analyzing the advantages and disadvantages of eating meat, for example. Because in this latter one, when you look at the advantages and disadvantages of eating meat, you need to consider lots of things like health aspects, environmental aspects, what else? Causes and effects of eating meat, etc. So it's a higher order thinking. The Bloom's taxonomy gives you a good sequence of these tasks. I will show you that later, and I will explain how you can vary your procedures according to those. And when it comes to language, this refers to the language required to carry out the task. So it can be subject-specific language, so the vocabulary of parts of a plant, for example, because that's what you're studying, that's what they need to learn. And the language of thinking as well, so how to express something. Something is part of something, so it's not just the parts of a plant, but how do you say that something is attached to something, or something is can be found north of something, right? So all this kind of language that is required to carry it out, not just content language, so vocabulary language, but grammatical knowledge as well. So how to use comparatives, for example, if you need to compare two things. So these three aspects, are they are interconnected in your tasks, but you can adjust them to the task to lower one aspect to make your task easier, or you can make them more challenging for your learners. It really depends on your learners. Let's see. As I promised, I'll show you an example of Bloom's taxonomy. So these are the orders of thinking here in a really simplified way, but you can see that if you look at the bottom, they are the easier tasks. Remembering something is easier. So it means that you recognize or recall facts. So for example, students watch that episode of Bluey on the beach, and they can remember what happened one after the other, sequencing the scenes, because they've just seen it, right? Understanding what a fact means, right, is a much more complex thing. So for example, in this lower task, they could probably, if you give them pictures of that cartoon, they could sequence it, but they might not have understood everything in the cartoon. So understanding something is the next level. So if you give them some comprehension questions, that's much more complex than just sequencing something. Applying the fact, rules, concepts, and ideas. So they learn some kind of concept, how to compare two things, for example, and they can apply it not in just one context, but they can apply it to another topic as well. That's much more complicated, and it shows their understanding more, right? Analyzing something, again, is even more. So breaking down information into components and parts. So my example for eating meat, right? So there are many aspects of the consequences of eating meat. You're going to think I don't eat meat now, right? Evaluate is means that you judge the value of information. So you have certain criteria, and according to that criteria, you can evaluate something that's in front of you. And creation, again, is the last one, that's the highest one, combining parts to make a new whole. Now, if you remember the three sequenced activities that I had through my example of Bluey, in the LOA framework, you could see that the first one was more about remembering, right? But also they had to create something, they had to talk about it, right, in their videos. The next one was much more complex because they had to find their family photos and had to narrate that, the sequences of what happened in their own family excursions. And in the last one, they had to create a story themselves and narrate that. You see, that was even through these orders of thinking, it was becoming more and more complex, and they got feedback throughout the process there, so that helped them. So I'm going to give you two examples when it comes to three aspects of concepts, procedures, and language. And the first example is, you can see a lot here, so I didn't animate this. So let's look at the first example. So the concepts are challenging. That's the one we saw there. The concepts are challenging and the procedures and language need to be lowered there, right? Because you want your students to have a valuable learning experience then. So the students, this is a task. Students watch a video about the country's geography in pairs. And then after that in pairs, students match the major geographical parts of the country to the map and state where they are. So let's say, for example, here we've got Japan, a blind map or a blank map there. And then they've got some phrases and they need to put these there, but geographical phrases there. So they need to know the language as well, right? Things like that I'm going to tell you later. So what are the concepts that we're looking at? The concept is geographical concepts in general, and the country's geography as well. So they need to know what a volcano means, but they also need to know what that is when it comes to Japan. So how many and where, etc. And the whole concept of a volcano, I guess. Procedures, understanding and remembering. That's what they need to do. You see that's on the lower end of that spectrum that we looked at, the procedures there. The language, now they need to do the vocabulary for geography, so the geographical concepts like island, tectonic plates, volcano, and also the language to express position to the east, in the middle of, you can find, there is, etc. You can see that for the task we can provide a blank map and some words to have, so that if you want to scaffold it more, you can just give them more language that they can use. Or you can differentiate. Some students can have without the scaffolding language there. Okay, so this was one example. This is when the concepts are, the concepts are a bit more challenging. Now let's have a look at just the opposite, when the concepts are not that challenging, but the procedures and the language could be made more challenging for the students. So for example, interview 2 classmates on their holiday experience and compare and contrast theirs to yours. I mean, you can probably phrase it in a much more accessible way and write a paragraph. So what do students need to do? They need to create a questionnaire, right? They need to talk to other people and they need to first think about what was their experience, them and the others, 2 people, and then need to collate all these answers and then write. There's a lot of steps here. So the concept is easy because it's all about your last holiday, right? So this is relatively accessible and personalized, and it's something that students might have even the vocabulary for, if not that they have time to look it up. Now, the procedures, as I said, is really complex because it involves writing questions, as I said, collating answers, grouping the answers. So if you want to make it more challenging, you ask the students to interview more people and then make a little survey results, them shown in a bar chart maybe, or some kind of table, right? And it needs to be presented in a cohesive paragraph, and that's the other aspect of it, right? Making sure that there's some kind of evaluation of it, synthesizing all the answers into one paragraph. The language, again, can be challenging. Not really the vocabulary of holidays, I would have to say, but the language for comparison and contrast, and also the way you present it in a paragraph, because we have added this layer of paragraph writing here. So you can see how this could be very easily changed even within the same topic. Now, as I said, you can add more. You can make these procedures more and less challenging. I just keep getting these. Let me just check. I can't click on anything. Okay. All right. Now, I'm glad you understand this now. This is a really useful concept, I have to say. Now I'm going to give this task to you to choose one of these models and try to come up with a task and see how you can scaffold it to make it more or less challenging. And let me show you. So we have looked at an example of A and an example of B. I would like you to choose A or B in your groups and think of one task within the topic of travel again. And what I'd like you to do is break it down the way I did and analyze it. So specify first just write down what the task is, and then specify the concept, the procedures, and the language, like in my examples. And I would like you to share it in the Padlet. So I'll just go back and show you what you need to do. Something like this, you have to write down what the task is, and then write down what these three aspects of it would mean, okay? Do you have any questions at this point? If no, I can see that you're already put into your breakout room. So I'll give you some time and then we'll have a look at how you go and you will be warned again. I guess a good 5-10 minutes would be okay in the breakout rooms. All right, everyone's back?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Now you've had some great responses here, and I understand you might need some more time to keep them all coming, but that's great. It's great to see how you can actually vary the differences in all the difficulty levels. So just some final thoughts here. In this session, we've looked at assessment and in a way, the whole session, the focus was more about task design within the learning-oriented assessment framework. So the aim is to keep track of the students' learning in a very meaningful way. So we have had a look at how task design can help students have a learning experience that takes into account their language abilities, and at the same time challenges them, so how you can vary these. Now, if you think about this scaffolding task that we've just done, the clear aspect, the three different aspects, if you insert it into the learning-oriented assessment framework and sequence your tasks like that, that creates an even more meaningful learning experience for them. So if you put well-designed tasks into learning-oriented assessment, that is will maximize the students' learning. Peer feedback and self-evaluation, these are essential part of learning-oriented assessment and good learner engagement as well. So I'd like to thank you with these, and I look forward to hearing from you. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can see my contact details there on the slide. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I might stop sharing if I find out how. Oh yeah. Yeah. There you go. So if you have any questions.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question. What do you suggest about the periodic or the interval for assessment? It has to be ongoing, or?
If the assessment, yeah. So in this kind of framework, you would actually keep track of students. And because if you use something that's online, you actually have a record of their performance as well. So you can actually see how well they're performing. And I've started to move towards actually saying checking how much progress that they've made during the period that I've been teaching them, instead of reaching a goal. I know that's an important thing as well, but because we're talking about, using language for communication as well, but the effort and the kind of development that you can see is really important as well. Any other questions maybe?
So roughly, what would be the ratio like between teaching and assessment that we can plan for? Like,
Oh, look, if you follow this kind of, it's hard to say because it really depends on how often you teach them. And I guess it's once a week, right?
once a week for 2
I
to
would
3
go
hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would go for formative assessment, just taking, keeping a record of how they're going, but also providing them direction of how to improve on that.
Mhm. Okay, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Mini assessment as the teaching goes by, as Pauline says. Yeah. that always motivates students. That's true. It really depends on your learners, right? Some students like to respond to actual summative assessment. Any other questions maybe? If not, I can hand over to Alex.